This happened when I was 19 years old. At the time, I went to my friend's birthday party with my college girlfriend and her boyfriend. We were drinking and having a good time. I was supposed to be taken home by her boyfriend, but they were ready to leave a lot earlier than I was. The people who shared a dorm with me had gone home for the night, so I was left alone. I was already pretty drunk and upset about something unrelated. I decided to use my fake ID to get into a bar by myself, which was a bad idea. I see that now. I took an Uber to the bar around 1 a.m. When I got there, I sat down and began talking to the bartender. A man who looked to be 22 or 23 years old came up to me. I wanted to talk to him because I thought he might buy me a drink. He said it was his birthday and that he was 34 years old. His age made me feel a little uneasy because he was in a college bar where mostly students hung out. Still, I stayed. Not too long after, around 2 a.m., I thought I had passed out for a moment but began to wake up. Somehow I had ended up in his car, still disoriented and unsure of what was going on. He said he would take me home, and I agreed because I was still somewhat drunk. I gave him my address through my phone, but as he drove, I realized we were going the wrong way. I told him to turn left at the next light, but he kept asking, "Are you sure?" Then he turned right instead. I tried to play it off, laughing nervously so he wouldn't know I was scared. When he didn't listen to me and continued driving straight, I knew I had to act quickly. I started taking pictures and recording videos of him with my phone, pretending it was just a joke. Eventually, I saw him pull into an apartment building. I asked if I could use the bathroom as an excuse to get away. He said yes and showed me the way. As he opened the door to what I assume was his apartment, I saw my chance to escape. I bolted, running as fast as I could without looking back. My phone was down to 1% battery, so calling for another Uber wasn't an option. After wandering for about 30 minutes, I saw a house with the lights on. Desperate, I rang the doorbell. A dog barking woke up the residents, a kind couple who offered to help me. They let me charge my phone, called a cab for me, and even offered to pay for it. The taxi arrived around 3:30 a.m. and took me back to my dorm safely. Looking back, I know it was incredibly dangerous to get into a stranger's car, but it all happened so quickly that I didn't have time to process it. That night taught me a lot about being cautious. This event took place when I was about 9 or 10 years old. I remember it clearly because it was my birthday and we were celebrating at a nearby park. Despite the rain earlier that day, I was still happy because it was my special day. Like most kids, I loved the gifts I received. It felt like Christmas. By the time the party ended, the rain had stopped and the sun had come out. My family carefully packed up the gifts and made sure we didn't leave anything behind before heading to the car. The park had a fancy metal gate that opened onto a small circle of streets, leading to the main highway. At first, everything seemed normal as we drove home. But as we approached an intersection near our street, I noticed my dad glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. He leaned over to talk to my mom, his tone low but serious. We turned onto our street and pulled into the driveway. My dad told me and my siblings to stay in the car while he got out to talk to the driver of the car behind us, a woman in a red vehicle, possibly a hatchback or a Prius. I watched as he approached her. The interaction was brief. My dad asked her what she was doing and she replied cryptically, "I got what I wanted." Then she drove off. When my dad came back inside, he called the police to report the incident. A patrol car arrived shortly after and my dad explained what had happened. He had noticed the woman filming us with her phone as we left the park and again when we stopped at the intersection. The officer said it wasn't unusual for people to film things nowadays, especially since action cameras like GoPros were becoming popular. However, my dad wasn't satisfied with that explanation. He found it strange that she had followed us all the way home just to film us. Even now I wonder why she did it. Was she just a nosy stranger or did she have some other motive? The police didn't seem concerned and didn't even file a proper report. It was unsettling to think that someone had followed us so closely and invaded our privacy. The apartment had 2 beds, one on each side. As you walked in, the kitchen was on the left and there was a small table where we could eat snacks. Upstairs on the right was the living room. A sliding glass door led to a small patio where the kids liked to play during the day. I knew my parents would be home soon because it was 1:30. After being begged and having 3 bedtime stories read to them, the kids finally fell asleep. They only had a few DVDs and VHS tapes to watch because they didn't have cable. Their study was done. To pass the time, I chose to land early. I was tired and had fallen asleep a few times already. Then, around 2 o'clock, I heard someone knock on the front door. I knew my parents had the key, so I just sat there in the dark and didn't move. The TV cast a dim light around the room and the knocking kept going on, which made me feel a little uncomfortable. I felt strange and a little paranoid because it was late and quiet in the flat. This was probably because of all the scary movies and books I had read. Anyhow, I chose to take the baseball bat that was lying next to the couch. Then something I will never forget took place. A small voice, almost that of a young woman, said softly, "Oh dear, that won't help you." My heart stopped and I got a chill. I quickly realized that the back door blinds weren't closed. Slowly, my eyes moved to the door. There was someone standing on the patio outside and looking straight into the house. It was hard to see the person, but I knew they were short and wide. I screamed and slammed the door behind me as I ran into the kids' room. Luckily, they were still sound asleep and had no idea what was going on. Then I got scared when I realized I didn't have a cell phone and the house didn't have any landline phones. I pushed the cabinet in front of the door with the hope that it would keep us safe. It got dark outside at that point, and I saw a shadow move across the window. The banging started up again, and I could hear the woman calling, "Come on, sweetheart, I'm not going to hurt you, come on out." I thought the window might break because it was getting hit so hard. The children woke up and screamed because they were scared. Even though I was strong for my age, I felt scared and weak around the kids. I heard my dad yell, "Hey, who the hell are you?" Right then. The person then ran off. The front door opened all of a sudden, and then there was a loud knock on the door to the kids' room. I felt so much better when I saw that it was my parents. I told them everything that had happened after letting them in and putting the table back where it belonged. The cops searched the area when they got there but didn't find anyone. They did see, though, that the trees around the patio were badly damaged, as if someone had pushed through them to get to the door. Then I babysat for them one more time. After about 5 months, they moved away, and I never babysat for anyone else again. In 2017, I worked at the Melting Pot restaurant in Littleton, Colorado. The restaurant was housed in a historic 3-story building that had once been a library and a diner. Some people claimed it was haunted, and it had even been featured on a paranormal TV show. The basement was especially eerie. It had 5 tables arranged in an L shape. To get there, you had to descend 2 short flights of stairs. As you entered, a table for 4 was on the left and a table for 2 was on the right. Farther back was a large round booth, and around the corner were 2 more tables. Rumor had it that the very last table was the most haunted. Guests often used Ouija boards there, trying to communicate with spirits. One night I was cleaning the basement tables with a coworker. Suddenly he cried out, saying he'd felt something scratch his back. When he lifted his shirt, there were 3 deep red scratches. He was so shaken that he quit his job on the spot. I didn't believe in ghosts, so I decided to test the legend. Alone, I walked to the infamous table and taunted the supposed spirit. Later that night, as I carried a tub of dirty dishes to the kitchen, a fondue pot flew out of the tub and tumbled down the stairs. It landed at the exact table I had taunted. When I went to retrieve it, something yanked my sleeve, slamming me into the stone wall. I hit my head hard and ended up with a 3-inch gash on my scalp. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but I've learned not to provoke what I don't understand. At the time, my nephew was about 5 years old. They asked me to watch him because they had plans for the night. I was young and had never watched a child by myself before. I chose to keep things easy because I wasn't sure what to do. I put him down in the living room and put Netflix on the TV so he would be busy for a while. We watched a show on Netflix that was for kids, and it was about talking cars. The sun was still up at 5 p.m. The couch was put next to a door with sliding glass panels. We could see outside because the door curtain was open. I sat down on the couch with my nephew, and we began to watch the show together. He liked it a lot and laughed out loud at some parts. I chose to watch for a while because he seemed to really enjoy it. The show kept us entertained for a while until it got dark outside. I turned on some lights, but the screen wasn't shut. The curtain was open so people outside could see in, but I could only see the dark night from inside. There are no lamps in my backyard because it backs up to a big field. Then, out of the blue, I heard the sound of a deck chair being dragged across the deck. I knew the sound right away and thought it was my parents. What made them come home quietly and then start moving deck chairs at night? I didn't really think about it. At the time, I didn't think it was strange because our neighborhood is safe. So my nephew and I watched TV for an extra hour before going to bed. I turned off the TV, got my cousin ready, and took him to his room. I saw my parents at home on the way there. I asked them if they had been outside on the deck because I was interested. Both of them said they hadn't been out. Because I was scared, I went to the kitchen and turned on the outside light. There was something outside the window that made me feel even worse. It was noticed that one of the deck chairs that was normally positioned around the outside table had been changed. It was now 5 to 10 feet away from where it usually was. Being less than a foot from the sliding glass door, the chair was facing the window. It looked like someone had carefully moved it there, which I found strange. I didn't understand why it was so close to the window, but then I got a chill because it was right in front of the curtain opening. From that spot, anyone sitting in the chair could have seen me and my nephew perfectly. It looked like someone had just pulled up the chair and sat down, which made us feel like we were being watched. The next morning, I saw 2 big shapes of hands on the window of my bedroom. The fingers were spread out. It looked like someone had pressed their hands against the glass to make the marks. The window in my bedroom is on the first floor. It looked like no one could get to it from the outside. The room used to belong to my brother, so it was hard for him to sneak girls in. They put in strong locks because of that. No matter how hard you tried, the window could not be opened. They were that safe. Some years have passed since then, and there have been no more signs that someone was watching me. But that night really scared me. From now on, I always close the curtains at night. This happened in 2017 when I was about 14 years old. At the time, I lived very close to my best friend. Since the beginning, we'd always been together. For this story, let's call him Mason. Mason and I spent as much time as we could having sleepovers at each other's homes. Like most teens, we did normal things like watch movies, play Call of Duty, and hang out in the neighborhood. But this sleepover was extra fun because for our birthdays, we both got ghillie suits. If you don't know what a ghillie suit is, it's the stealthy outfit snipers wear in movies to blend in with bushes or the ground. It makes me laugh to think about how silly we must have looked walking around the neighborhood in those. Still, we were excited to test out our new gear, so we came up with a plan. We decided to play ding-dong ditch and hide in our suits as close to the house as possible. To set the scene, our neighborhood was still under construction. Many of the homes were complete, but some were just empty lots surrounded by trees. We chose a house that everyone in the neighborhood called the Hermit House. Every neighborhood seems to have one. A house with an owner who's always doing something odd or creepy. I remember seeing this guy trying to break into my mom's car once, but that's another story. To help you picture the area, the Hermit House was flanked by 2 empty lots. Behind the house, there were a few trees and the I-95 highway. Mason and I had also created a narrow trail that started in his backyard and ran parallel to the house's garden, leading directly into mine. It was hidden by fences and trees, but gave us a clear path to escape if needed. Our plan was simple. Mason would hide to the left, while I rang the doorbell and ran into the woods on the right. But as soon as I got close to the house, something unexpected happened. The door opened by itself, before I even had a chance to ring the bell. I froze, looking up to see 2 men charging at me. My first thought was that we'd been spotted earlier and they were waiting for us. When I turned to run, I saw another man moving toward where Mason was hiding. At first, I wasn't too worried. I was a fast runner. But when I saw the man blocking Mason's escape route ahead of me, panic set in. Mason accidentally led the man onto our trail, boxing me in between the 2 of them. Thinking quickly, I jumped a fence and landed in the backyard of the Hermit House. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I believe that decision is what saved me. By jumping the fence, I avoided being cornered on the trail. As I crossed the yard, a terrible smell hit me. It was so bad I nearly vomited and had to cover my nose. When I looked around, I saw why. It was filled with dead animals. There was a decomposing dog and about 8 dead chickens lying in the yard. I didn't stay to investigate further. The smell was overwhelming, and I was terrified. I made it over the next fence and back onto the trail leading to Mason's house. When I finally got home, I told Mason everything. We debated calling the cops, but decided against it. We were worried we'd get in trouble for trespassing or for creating the trail that led through those properties. Even now, I wonder what those men were doing with all those dead animals and why the smell didn't linger on the trail itself. After a few months, my family moved out of that neighborhood, and I haven't seen anything strange since. But the Hermit House and those men still haunt my memories. I remember living in Jacksonville, North Carolina with my husband and our 2-year-old son in 1991. I was married and living at Camp Lejeune at that time. It was a big deal because it was our son's birthday, so we were getting ready to have a small party the next day to celebrate. We asked some other little boys his age and their families to come. Their families were also in the service and lived in the same apartment complex as us. It was nighttime when I thought about going to Party City or some other store for party supplies. But it was almost closing, and not many people were inside. Only one person seemed to be working there. The cashier was a nice young blonde woman. There was a big wall of glass in front of the store, where the cash registers were. It was dark outside, but the store was bright inside. After getting what I needed, I left the store and went to the parking lot. She locked the door and then came back to close her book. Everything in the shopping area where the store was located was closed and dark. There were only 3 cars parked there, hers, mine, and a van. 2 really creepy guys were sitting in the van, looking out the window at the girl. Fortunately, there were parking spots to my left, so I didn't have to walk right next to them. They saw me coming up behind them, but they were really focused on the girl closing up. As I walked closer, I kept a close eye on them. One of them got out of the van and smiled at me, while the other opened his door. I had my keys ready, so I quickly opened my car door, jumped in, and locked it. But I couldn't just leave her alone. I didn't have time to call for help, but I didn't want to abandon her. I watched the guys, but they didn't seem to care about me. We all watched her turn off the lights, walk outside, and lock the door while they stared at her. Strangely, she never even looked out into the parking lot. She had no idea that 3 people were watching her. The creepy guys in the van shut their doors and slowly walked toward her as she crossed the parking lot. Immediately, I sped up and drove between them and her, staying right next to her the whole time. I could have reached out and touched her if I had been in the passenger seat. Oddly, she never even looked at me. She just kept walking as if nothing was happening. I couldn't talk to her because my windows weren't electric, and I would have had to roll them down manually. In my rearview mirror, I could see the guys getting angry and irritated because I was blocking their access to her. She opened her car door, got in, and drove off without ever acknowledging my car or the van. I followed her for a while, keeping an eye on the van. Eventually, the van gave up and drove off in a completely different direction. I kept following her for as long as I thought necessary to ensure she was safe. When I was sure she was fine for the night, I went back home. I wish I could say I called the store or the cops the next day to report what happened, but it was so long ago that I'm not certain. I like to think I did because I know how I am, but the memory is fuzzy. When I was about 17, I lived in a town with about 1,200 other people. There was a festival every year that everyone looked forward to. The adults would get together at town hall for a party and dinner. They put on short plays and talked about big or funny events from the past year, which made everyone laugh. This event took place every year in February. It was snowing outside and getting dark early in the evening. Most of the parents went to the party, so all the girls between the ages of 13 and 17 were watching. My 2 friends and I couldn't join because you had to be 18 to do so we thought of something else to do. We offered rides to the town hall in my friend's car around the village. Since there were no taxis in the village, many people were happy to pay us a small amount of money. It was also a smart way to make extra cash. Following our several hours of driving, some adults asked us to check on their homes to see if everything was okay since we knew where everyone lived. They felt a little better after hearing this. Also, I think they wanted to keep us busy until the party was over so we could later drive them home. It was dark on the streets in an older part of the town, so we drove more slowly. There lived a mom we had given a ride to before. I think her 3 kids were about 2, 4, and 8 years old, and her 15-year-old niece was watching them. She was a single mom. Anyway, it was about 10 o'clock at night, and there were hills and cliffs all around this place. My friend told me he saw something move in her yard as we drove by. We laughed that it was probably just a cat and didn't think much of it. We kept going until we got to the other side of the village. However, my friend in the back seat said he felt bad. He planned to check the snow for tracks on the way back to the house. We stopped the car and looked over the fence when we got back. Yes, there were new tracks in the snow from people. They looked like those of an older person. We looked at each other for a moment and then chose to follow the path. There were tracks that went past all the bedrooms and turned toward each window, like someone was trying to look inside. At some point, the trail ended at the street and we missed it because the snowplow had gone through earlier that night. We debated whether to get the mom from the party or ring the doorbell to make sure everything was okay. We chose to have 2 of us stay in the neighborhood and watch the house while the driver went to the police station and picked up the mom on the way back. This was because none of the tracks led to the back door, or the front door. After the driver left, we saw someone hiding behind one of the sheds a few houses down the street after about 5 minutes. He was just sitting there with a small camera in his hand. He wasn't moving at all. After some time, he got up, took a good look around, and then began walking toward the house where his mom lived. He moved slowly as if he didn't want to be seen and went to the back of the house, straight to the back door. It was dark, so we could barely see him move, but we were sure he wasn't just passing by. My friend and I ran through the 2 gardens between us and the mom's house without thinking to try to catch him before he could get in the back door. We got there just in time, and he was trying to open the door when we yelled at him to stop. He turned and ran away quickly. We went after him. He took off running down the street to get some space, but we could both run fast, so we ran after him. We were going through the worst time of our lives. I remember that my heart was beating fast, and all I could think about was not falling or losing my speed. Soon the street would come to an end and we could see the sharp right turn coming up ahead. I knew I could not keep up with him if I stayed on the street. I quickly chose to take a chance. In order to get to the turn before him, I didn't slow down. Instead, I jumped off the road and onto the grass and dirt next to it. I planned to stand somewhere I could block him. He slowed down after the sharp turn, so I pushed myself even more because I knew this was my chance to stop him. My plan didn't work, though, because he made the turn without slowing down much. I was tired from running through the deep snow, so I knew I had to make myself slow down. My friend was getting closer and quickly caught up to me, but I was still about 10 meters behind him. My friend tripped him with a kick when he saw that he could. It was the fastest takedown ever, and the guy fell. He passed out after hitting his head hard on the frozen ground. The guy's pockets were checked by my friend and found a small camera that was broken. The driver finally showed up a few minutes later with the mom and the cops. Soon after, an ambulance came and took the man away. We told the police chief everything that happened. The chief stopped typing and looked up at us when my friend said that he tripped the guy. "Are you sure you tripped the guy?" "Okay." His slow nod and small smile made it look like he agreed with our account of what happened. But it really scares me every time I think about it. This man must have thought of everything. He knew when the party was. He picked out her house because he knew the mom was a single parent and knew where everything was. It all seemed way too planned out. I'm still not sure what happened, and this event makes me feel uncomfortable every time I think about it. It feels even weirder because I live in a safe area. It just goes to show that you can't be too sure.